Everyone, thanks for tuning in again. Let's continue with our discussion of interpreting a basic Florida residential insurance policy so that you can better understand what your coverages are coming into this hurricane season. And so in the prior videos, we've looked at the declarations page, we've looked at a summary of coverages. Today may be the most important video that I go through in this entire series, and that's really interpreting how the different sections of your policy interact with one another, because ultimately that's what your insurance company is doing when you submit a claim. So we're going to look at this citizens policy again as just a template to understand these things, and I'll walk you through what these different sections are. And I think this should be the most helpful video and something that a lot of people don't understand, particularly clients, when it comes to interpreting their coverages. So let's open up this insurance policy again. And if you saw the last video, we looked a little bit at the definitions, which of course are important for you to take a look at so you understand some key terms in your policy. But I want to reemphasize these different sections in your policy. So these insurance policies will have two basic sections. You have the section one, which is called your property coverages, and then you have the section two, which is going to be your liability. Within the section one, you have several different, let's say, subparts as well, and it's those parts, when interpreted together, that are going to tell you what kind of coverage you have. So you have the actual building coverages we talked about in the last video. You have a perils insured against section. You have an exclusion section. We're going to look at those in detail in this video. So here we have the property coverages, which I showed you in the last video. If you continue on in this policy, you'll eventually get to the perils insured against section. Here it is, section one, perils insured against. Continue forward again, and there should be an exclusion section coming up. Here it is, section one, exclusions. Beyond this, there will be a condition section that I'll talk about in another video, but I want to focus on these first three parts of section one for today. So section one, property coverages, is what I focused on in the last video, and that's what's going to tell you essentially how you define the different coverages in your policy. The dwelling coverage, the other structure coverage, the personal property coverage, the additional loss of use coverage, and even here in this policy, there's what's called an additional coverages as well that are in here for the owner of this policy. So those basic definitions, and here it is, additional coverages. Those basic definitions are established here. This is kind of just the structural first part of your insurance policy is, let's say, laying the foundation or the groundwork for what is covered, and then the policy is going to start telling you in what events, if damage occurs, that these coverages are going to be triggered. And that's what leads us into section two, well, let's say part two of section one, which is going to be these perils insured against. Now, this, together with the exclusion section I'm about to demonstrate for you, are the most important parts of your policy. So ultimately, what you're buying is insurance against certain risks to your home. And in the insurance world, that phrasing has different terms that can be used interchangeably. So the risk can also be known as the peril or the events that occur that cause damage to your home. That is what you're buying insurance for. And so it's really this perils insured against section that's telling you what perils or what events or risks you are purchasing insurance for, as opposed to the next section, the exclusion section. That is the insurance company telling you these are the things that we are excluding from your coverage. These are the things that you are not buying any coverage for, that we don't have to pay you for if they cause damage. So you have to understand these two sections together to really get a grasp of what coverage you have. Now, an important understanding for looking at these two parts of your policy together is by interpreting them, it will tell you what kind of insurance policy you have. This is one of the most important concepts for property insurance. There's two basic property insurance forms that you can purchase for your property. There is what's called an all-risk policy, and there is a named peril policy. Going with the easier one, let's say, named peril is exactly what it sounds like. It covers the perils that it specifically tells you are covered, or in other words, the perils that are named. So for example, in those policies, you often see basic things like fire, hurricane, um, maybe plumbing breaks, theft, and it's only those specific things that are enumerated in your policy that are actually covered in a named peril policy. That's as opposed to what's called an all risk policy, which, as strange as this may sound, literally covers every single risk you could possibly imagine. That's what an all risk policy is. So in an all risk policy, in order to determine your coverages, you're not actually looking at the perils, you're looking at the exclusions, because what the insurance company is doing is saying, yeah, we cover you for all perils or all risks, except the ones that we tell you that we're excluding from your coverage. So that's where the minutia, where the details really matter, is because you need to look at those exclusions to see what coverage the insurance company is actually taking away from you from the standard all risk policy. And it is the all risk policy that is far more common in Florida for residential properties. And going back to this policy that I just had on the screen, you can see that, and the triggering language for that is actually right here under your section 1 perils insured against, the very first language that says we insure against risk of direct loss to property described in A and B only if that loss is a physical loss to property. Believe it or not, this is one of the most important languages you can find in a property policy. This, very non-descriptive, indiscreet language that's buried in there. That's going to tell you what kind of policy you have, and really is saying what the insurance company's obligation is to you. And they bury it in there very deeply. Their obligation to you is they're insuring against risk of direct loss to property described in coverages A and B, which, as we saw in the last video, and as it says right here, is your dwelling and your other structures, if that loss is a physical loss to property, so it has to cause physical damage. Now, when you see this language, uh, we insure against direct loss to property. That is the triggering language for all risk policies. So if you see that, you have an all risk policy, that means your policy covers everything except for what your insurance company tells you it doesn't cover. And so you can then go right into the next section and it says, we do not insure, however, for loss, and then they're going to tell you what they don't cover. So you'll see things like, let's say, freezing of a plumbing system, or the more common ones you may see is for water loss is a constant repeated seepage, or things caused by age or wear and tear or deterioration or decay. These kind of long-term concepts are usually excluded from your policy. Now, if you continue forward and go to the exclusion section, we're going to see even more things that are not covered, with an important caveat that I will likely discuss in a further video. But this is going to tell you some other things that if these things occur and cause damage to your property, they're not covered either. For example, earth movement and settlement, or that also applies to sinkholes. Water damage in the form of flood is always going to be excluded from these things. Neglect, power failure, war, nuclear hazard, terrorism you usually see in here as well. Intentional damage, things of that nature are going to be strictly excluded from your insurance policy. So it's looking at these things when you know what you're not covered for, that's actually going to tell you what coverages you have. So what you're not going to see in the exclusions are things like hurricanes, storms. I mean, typically, if you're buying a good policy, you're not going to see those things. And so your everyday kind of normal occurrences should not be excluded from your insurance policy. So those are the things, when you're looking at them together, these two very important sections, the Section 1 exclusions and the named perils, the perils insured against, that are going to tell you in an all risk policy what kind of coverages you have. Now, I could probably spend a whole hour going through this and going through it in detail, and I don't expect the basic consumers at home to be able to interpret this and understand what coverages you have. And frankly, there's so much nuance and overlap and interplay between words and even things I haven't talked about yet, like endorsements or additional definitions that may impact these things. But that's really besides the point of why I'm making this video and to discuss this. The important thing is that interpretation of those sections of your policy is where the heart of your policy really lies. And that's what your insurance company is obligated to cover for you. So when you have an all risk policy, like many of you watching this video, I guarantee you that you do have, it's really the insurance company's obligation to tell you that your loss is excluded. That's maybe the most important takeaway from this video. You have an all risk policy. You don't have a named peril policy. So your obligation is simply to tell the insurance company that you suffered a physical loss to your property. Now they have to come inspect that loss and determine if there's an exclusion factor that may restrict your coverage. So In many respects, you don't feel like you necessarily have to prove that you have coverage under your policy when you have an all risk policy, because it's the insurance company's burden to demonstrate an exclusion as opposed to your burden to establish coverage. As you would if you had a named peril policy, you have to demonstrate that the loss falls under one of the perils. So it's a lot of complexity to this. But I think the takeaway for you all should be have some comfort if you do have an all risk policy. Let the insurance company do their job. Let them be the ones that determine coverage. Don't let them try to push you into the corner and make you prove that your claim is covered. And if they do decide that your claim is not covered, they have to tell you in writing specifically why and point to these exclusions and say, we found the existence of these things, therefore your claim is not covered. So that's an important takeaway from looking at these sections. And so you understand, and let's say in a bigger picture, how your insurance policy works and what the interplay is between your obligations and theirs when it comes to coverage. So I hope this is helpful. If you have any questions about that, or maybe you have more of a nuanced issue within your own policy that you'd like for me to take a look at, again, drop a comment below in the YouTube video. Send me a question. If you're a former client, send me an email or call me, and I'm happy to take a look at your policy that you may have now and help you understand these things better. So thanks for tuning in.